Last time it took a second. Receiving your contents. Your audience will see it in a moment. This the problem. 'Cause I don't know when we're live.
I think YouTube would tell us.
YouTube, tell me things.
Okay.
We are totally live.
Totally live.
Totally live. The internet can see us. Hey guys, and welcome to a Betwixt the Books Discussed video, which we haven't done in a while.
No, we haven't.
Although they were the videos that we were able to sort of keep doing because they're not edited and more impromptu, and we just sort of sit and talk for a little while. So yeah, they're a good choice. But yeah, it's been a little while since our last one. What was our last one? Was that Harry Potter and the Cursed Child?
Yes.
So that was like July. Like it's.
No, did we do genre hierarchy? When was that?
That was before, way
That
before.
was before?
Yeah.
Oh, that was a very popular discussion for you guys, so I just remember it. So I'm like, oh, they liked it.
It meant more. Yeah, I don't think we've done. I mean, we've done tags. I don't know.
I could check, but we're busy. We're making a new one.
Today we wanted to discuss prequels and reading order, which are together and apart in different ways. But we'll get to that. We've been thinking about it lately. Do you want to start, or do you want me to?
I can start. So prequels, I mean, you guys know I read a lot of YA, and so prequels are like that a thing in YA now, where you read them, and like everybody's doing them. Everybody, they come out in the novella form. And if you saw my review of Jodi Meadows' The Orphan Queen and The Mirror King, I talked about it there, and how I thought that maybe if I had read them, the book would be different. But so I don't like reading them. The prequel novella things, they bother me. But just recently, I was reading Cruel Crown in preparation for reading Glass Sword by Victoria Aveyard. And Cruel Crown has two different novellas in there. One is very short and one is longer. And I was just left, I finished it, and I was left thinking that I would not have cared about anything in these if I hadn't first read, the first book, which is weird because they're prequels to the first book, and it was just like, I don't know, I felt weirdly gypped by it all, and I was kind of thinking about why, which led me to partially suggest this video. And then Michaela was also having her own adventure.
Yes, so for our Pop Sugar Challenge, one of the challenges was to read a book in its prequel. And I had the problem of the genres I like don't often have prequels, unlike YA. There's okay. There's just not a whole lot of prequel type things. There's more reading order mushiness, which happens a lot, especially for the sci-fi fantasy crowd with the very long-running large world type plot things. But there isn't like an actual prequel book for a lot of the things that I was looking for. I ended up picking Hannibal Rising as the prequel, which is the last book that author wrote, but it comes chronologically before the first book in the series. So the first book being Red Dragon, and the second book being Silence of the Lambs, which a lot of people really know. And then there's a third book called Hannibal, and then the fourth book, which came out much later, and I think right after Silence of the Lambs came out and had a whole lot of popularity. He wrote a book that talks about Hannibal Lecter's sort of upbringing and like how he became the horrible, evil Hannibal the Cannibal that he is. I chose to do the thing where I'm reading them in publication order, where I'm going to read the first book and the second book, decide if I need to read Hannibal after that, because I don't want to have to read 4 books for the one challenge, and I already effed myself by having to read at least 2. But they're good, and they're short-ish. They're like 300, 400 pages.
Yeah, that's short for us.
That is short for us. And then I will read Hannibal Rising. I don't think that it would have made sense to read Hannibal Rising before reading Red Dragon or Silence of the Lambs, because you don't know anything about Hannibal. I mean, except for like the pop culture bit that he is a cannibal. It, it is more impactful to have this story of like how he got to where he is if you've already read about him as a thing. But that means that you're breaking the chronological order, which a lot of people say is like the way to do it so that you're getting the order of events properly.
And I mean, that was one of the things that struck me about it. So I was talking to somebody in Barnes & Noble the other day about Cassandra Clare's books. And Cassandra Clare, she wrote The Mortal Instruments first, and then she wrote The Infernal Devices, which goes back in time. And then she wrote the new series, which is after The Mortal Instruments. So she's kind of gone boom, boom, boom. And they were saying, well, should we read it in publication order or time order? Because unlike some books where the prequel goes back in time for a character, the Infernal Devices doesn't have the same characters. There's ancestors of characters that we know, but you don't have to. It's not a prequel about them per se. And so I was saying that you can read them in out of order, in like event order, but I really still feel like you lose a lot of the like inside jokes that are in Infernal Devices if you haven't read The Moral Instruments. So I still wouldn't recommend, even though it's not even just a character prequel like with the Hannibal series, I wouldn't recommend that if you wanted to get into it that much, because the problem with this also is that I think Infernal Devices is much more well written than The Moral Instruments. So it's like, what? How do you say that? But like,
Yeah.
I know that I would not have enjoyed the Infernal Devices as much if I hadn't read Moral Instruments. And then because of publication order, though, she was publishing a Moral Instruments book and an Infernal Devices book, a Moral Instruments book, and they were like kind of feeding off each other, and that makes it even weirder. And it's just like, what?
Yeah.
So then if you want to read in publication order, you have to actually like be reading the series kind of at the same, well, the end of the Moral Instruments plus the like this, and it's just like, why?
Just everything.
So much effort.
So much effort. So not publication order, but sort of series publication order.
Series publication order.
So read the entirety of the Mortal Devices before starting
the
Mortal
Instruments, Moral Instruments, Infernal Devices.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't like mixing series like that. I like to, like, if I have access to the whole series. I didn't when I was reading them. I did read them like this because they came out like that, and I was reading them as they came out. So that's different. But if you have access to it, like, well, I guess. I don't know. Prequels make life so confusing.
Yeah. Similarly to that, I wanted to talk about the Chronicles of Narnia because as my new position at Barnes & Noble as the kids lead, one of the things I'm doing is recommending books for kids all the time, and I had somebody ask about the Chronicles of Narnia and whether we had the first book. And my first question was, which book do you consider the first book? Because the publishers actually have two different like ways of numbering the series. There's some publications that say The Magician's Nephew is the first book, and there's some publications that say The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the first book. And I think they have to do with one is chronologically ordered and one is publication order. And I think The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe technically came out before The Magician's Nephew, but The Magician's Nephew takes place chronologically first. And when I read them as a kid, I read The Magician's Nephew first. So I had the chronological ordering of it. And I recommended it that way, not just because that was the way that I read it. So, like, I knew that it was completely comprehensible that way. But I also feel like the prequel in that case of The Magician's Nephew about how Narnia comes to be makes it more interesting when you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and you see these places and you know how they got there, essentially. And I'm sure that the opposite could be true as well. Like, you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you're seeing a place be built, and you're like, oh, that's where the thing happened, instead of being like, oh, I know how that happened, how that got there. So it might not matter what order it is. You can have the same sort of experience either way, and it's really just down to preference.
Well, and I think it comes down to also how well these prequels are planned, because I feel like there are definitely some prequels where like the author knows that they have happened before they write the series. So like kind of like when they were doing their character building, they were like, this is an event, and then after that book has come out, they're like, oh, I can do this. Like that's how I feel the novellas around Throne of Glass are. Like, the novellas are referenced throughout the book series, and so it's like they are obviously were important, were in Sarah's head when she wrote it, and like she continues to think about them and continues to build them in. But like things like the infernal devices were not planned when the Mortal Instruments was started. So the richness, the interconnectedness of it only starts later on after she goes, oh, I'm gonna write this series now.
Mm.
So like that's why it's not important to read them first, because like they only become important later because they weren't something that she was thinking about. And yes, that's a separate thing. Like it's not the same characters, but at the same time, it's just I feel like, especially in YA, a lot of the novellas that come out feel either like pointless, like just an elaboration on something that just sounded cool or something, or like what I felt with the Mirror King, which was that like I felt the Mirror King's plot was so choppy that I felt like I was actually being told I had to read the novellas before I read Mirror King to understand what was happening, but I didn't want to do that because like that's 3 or 4 novellas for $3 a piece I'd have to buy, and I was just like, if this is so important, why isn't it in the book?
Yeah.
Like,
why is it another weird thing?
Why is this happening? So I don't know. It's just like that weird tension in prequels.
Yeah. Slightly off topic with the prequel thing, but on topic in the reading order thing. Yesterday we had a customer who came into the store and asked about the Warhammer book series, which is a huge book series, and it follows multiple different plot lines. And there is like a storyline that goes through it, but you don't necessarily have to read all of the bits because there are some books that go back and like in Game of Thrones where they go back and visit other characters, but the same event. So you already know what happens, and if you don't necessarily care about those characters, you could technically skip that because, like, you know what the event happened, but then at the same time, you might get to a later book and have missed crucial, like, information dropping from that book. So my recommendation to him and what he ended up thinking about was, like, it's really up to personal preference. If you are fine with missing maybe some information that's helpful down the line because you don't care about those characters that you're going back to see, then skip it and move on to the next one. Or if you're one of those people who's like, no, I need to see how all of these pieces fit together and create this bigger picture, read them all in order. And by that, it's the publication order and not the chronological order, because if you were 2 books take place at the same time but are different places. Does that make sense? And I was saying it's similar to Discworld, which is maybe the most famous fantasy example of, like, what the fuck do I do? To the point where, like, people argue where you should even start. Like, which book is the first book to read? Which is the worst? Like, a lot of these series are like, well, read this book first, and then go back and read the prequel, and then read this one. But even with Discworld, it's like, some people will say start with this, like, trio of books that follow this one plot line, even though they were published later than these other books because they're the most fun, and then you can go around. It's so confusing and a mess, and just arguments are had over what's the best order to read something in. Do you have a...
No, I was just thinking that, like, that's the difference between, like, YA prequels and fantasy prequels. Because, like, one of the issues with poorly written YA is that the world building suffers. I think that's one of the first things that definitely suffers for me in them. But I also don't like how complicated, like, most fantasy books are. So, like, I'm really just looking for a middle ground somewhere, folks. And they're not all YA is like this, but, like, so that's what I mean by you can tell when a YA prequel has already been worked into a story, or like if it's something that came up later, or if it's not really that important, you know. But like fantasy, adult fantasy, I suppose in that way has that capability because that's usually world building that's done, and I think that's really interesting to have that capability of like, is it a prequel? Is it the first book? Is it, because you don't know. Whereas like in YA, you're just like, no, you have to read this and then read this. You know, because even though this comes before this, this won't make sense.
Yeah.
So like, and it's always that cut and dry, really, as far as like the prequels that I've at least read. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I like that about fantasy, at least that it's like aware of itself and what it is making enough
Yeah.
to like to do this and just be like, I don't know. Because at least thought's gone into it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Thought has gone into it. And part of it is just like following characters or following a specific subplot to the greater plot more than like the world overarching plot that's going on. This happened in one of my one of my favorite. I don't have anything famous. One of
We
my
have this channel.
not famous, so not
We're
famous.
like 170 people famous.
We're a wee small bean of a channel. Small bean. Favorite paranormal romance series, and it's common in romance series. Well, I think that it's following each book is a different set of characters, and there's usually an overarching plot in the world. And you meet back with other characters that you've met before, or characters that you're going to meet in future books. But you don't necessarily need to read them in like publication order. You can be like, oh, I kind of liked the sassiness of that character in that one book, and go and read their plot line. And obviously you might be confused by some of the things that are going on in the greater world bit, but the main storyline is still perfectly accessible to you. So you just sort of skim over the bits that they're like, oh god, the world's ending. And you're like, whatever. I want to read about these two people kissing. Like, keep going.
Who cares if the world is ending?
No.
It's not important. There's
There's
kisses.
people kissing. That's what we need more of, really.
Really.
Yeah, so it happens, and honestly, that's okay too. I think if you're one of those people that picking your books comes down to whether you want to invest the time and energy into it, and you have this huge daunting series, if you can be like, well, I don't technically have to read every single book. I can pick and choose which books I want to read and the order I want to read them in. Based on my preference of the characters or the plot in that particular book, it also has it lends itself to interesting interpretations of things, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Things. Much. So if you have any thoughts about this, by the way, please, obviously, we can only interact with ourselves right now. But we would love to interact with you as well. And if you've read any of the series that we've mentioned, there are plenty of other series with prequels, novellas, things like that. Like, one thing we didn't touch on that much, and I might in something else, is like the difference between a prequel novella and a prequel series, because that's like a thing in YA now. The novella has come into vogue, but there's also like prequel series and the difference there. So, if you have thoughts, which way did you read the Chronicles of Narnia? I started with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I did. That was the way mine was numbered. Magician's Nephew was number 5.
It's weird. That's weird for me.
I didn't get that far. I got bored.
It's fair. I don't think I got that far in mine either. I think I read like 3 or 4. I think I got to Prince Caspian and was like, I don't give a shit about you.
Yeah, I got to the Silver Chair. I think I started The Magician's Nephew and I was like, blah. And then I tried to start the 6th one, and I think that was the time when I was like, wow, this book's about religion! Like, book 6. Wow, baby Gretchen, so smart.
Guys, did you know that the Chronicles of Narnia is about religion? I did. I did. Yeah, it was fun. So yeah, those are things.
Yeah. I think that we've talked a bit. So again, now we want to hear from you. And usually we do these live. For those of you who are new, we do usually do these live, but we had time. We wanted to get this done because we haven't been posting a lot.
No.
So this was not live. We're sorry, but we have our phones connected to us at all times. So if you comment on this video, we will get back to you and talk to you and talk to us.
Yeah.
That's all we really want, guys.
Communication.
Communication.
Yeah.
Foundational block of every relationship.
Yes. All right.